All right, welcome everybody to our next session with leadership in learning. This is the second video in this series, and we are focusing on how leadership can be implemented and used in the classroom. We've done quite a bit last week on leadership. This week, we focused on how reflection affects leadership. So building confidence through peer assessments and agency. Let's think for a minute about a classroom scenario, right? Have you ever watched a child realize their words can lift someone else, right? In a bustling Nairobi classroom, I witnessed something profound. A typically reserved student offered feedback to a peer in a small group activity project. And in that simple exchange, everything kind of shifted. The recipient's face lit up with understanding, but more importantly, the giver discovered their own voice mattered. This wasn't just about academic content. It was about human connection, mutual growth, and the quiet birth of leadership. So that moment reminded me of one reason why we teach, right? To help students see themselves as capable of shaping others around them in their learning journey. So the heart of our lesson today is reflection becomes leadership when students take responsibility for each other's growth. This is where confidence begins. Not in independence, but in interdependence. When learners recognize they hold the power to illuminate understanding for their peers, right? They can teach what they're learning to those around them. They can help others around them to improve. When learners recognize they hold the power to illuminate understanding for their peers, they step into a role far greater than just student. They become guides, mentors, and collaborators, which is what we want for our students as they grow into their 21st century skills, and also what we expect our teachers to model and demonstrate to the students in the way that they approach teaching. So the Finnish approach teaches us that learning is inherently social. And that competency-based curriculum in Kenya in particular echoes this truth. You might find yourself in a different educational setting, and that's okay, because these ideas and these concepts that we're going to be talking about today and the practical application in the classroom section will apply to you just as well, whether you're in CBC or another setting. Real confidence emerges when we trust others enough to let them see our thinking, and when we care enough to help them see their own potential more clearly. So we're going to focus today, our conversation will explore how reflection evolves into something far more powerful. It's a tool for building community in the classroom with the students. It's a tool for building agency in our students, and it's improving lasting confidence in the classroom. So in our research, Finnish National Agency for Education 2016 tells us assessment is an essential part of learning and teaching aimed at supporting students' growth toward their own goals. So this self-reflection or this reflective leadership concept needs to be coupled or paired with self-assessment, with creating goals at the beginning of each month or at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of every week, so that students can begin to connect the dots and put things together. In Finland, assessment is never about labeling students or sorting them into categories for success or failure. Instead, it's woven into the fabric of learning itself, a continuous conversation about growth, understanding, and next steps. So Finnish educators understand that when assessment becomes a tool for learning rather than judgment, rather than grades, rather than you did it right or you did it wrong, students develop healthier relationships with feedback. They see mistakes as information, not failure. They view peer input as valuable perspective, not criticism. This philosophy has helped Finland maintain one of the world's most equitable and effective educational systems, where every child's progress matters more than their comparative rankings. Let's talk a little bit about CBC. CBC echoes this philosophy. In Kenya, it mirrors Finnish wisdom through its emphasis on self and peer assessments. The CBC recognizes that true competency isn't demonstrated through tests alone. It emerges through reflection, application, and the ability to articulate one's own learning journey. Again, setting those goals, right? We have to have an end spot that we're working towards so that we can understand how to reflect and assess the progress that we're making. When students engage in peer assessment within this CBC framework in Kenya, they're not just checking boxes on a rubric. They're developing critical thinking, empathy, and communication skills. These are all competencies that we find in CBC. We also find them reflected in Finnish education. They're learning to see learning itself as a collaborative endeavor where everyone has something to contribute and something to gain. When students in a classroom see themselves as a community working towards a goal, not only as a classroom goal, but as individual goals, all working in the same direction, they feel like they have a part, right? Some of them will take on leadership skills or positions in the class. Others will choose other roles, but it will be a community where they all work together and they move towards that goal. So self and peer assessment equals student ownership of learning. And a sidebar to that is that if students are engaged in their learning and understand they're part of a community, then behavior issues diminish. And that is research-based. So from reflection to collaboration, the 3 steps of reflective leadership. We have individual reflection, where students pause to consider their own understanding, challenges, and progress towards these individual goals. Then we have shared reflection, where they are learning to share their thinking with peers, making their learning process visible and open to dialogue, sharing ideas, right? Getting more input from their peers or their colleagues per se, or their community members. And then we have collaborative feedback. This is where students offer constructive insights that help each other refine their understanding or identify next steps. So if one student is struggling to understand, they can ask questions. Or if a student has understood something, but it's not quite the main concept, the students around them can help refine and support so that they can better understand. So when reflection becomes shared, it transforms into a conversation of learning, collaboration, right? These are 21st century skills that we want our generation that's growing up in elementary and middle and high school to form strong understandings with. This progression doesn't diminish individual thought. It enriches it by adding multiple perspectives and collaborative wisdom. You can think about it in the context of your own work, right? When we do projects or when we work with our colleagues, we share input, we refine ideas, we make the concepts stronger by communicating and talking with each other. So there's a power in effective feedback. Effective feedback answers 3 questions. Where am I going? How am I getting there? And where do I go next? What are the next steps? John Hattie's research on feedback has shaped educational practice worldwide, revealing that not all feedback carries equal weight. The most powerful feedback addresses clear learning intentions. So again, on the teacher's side, we need to establish and support the students in creating clear goals. Help students understand their current progress. They will not know if they're progressing if they don't have end marks, and points toward concrete next steps. But here's what makes peer feedback revolutionary. When students answer these questions for each other, the learning deepens exponentially. The giver must truly understand the concept to explain it, right? The receiver hears it in a language that resonates with their experience, because students who are in the same grade level will be at roughly the same developmental understandings, right? That's why we group kids by age or by development. So they will communicate with each other in a way that is more effective than an adult trying to express some feedback of some kind. Both develop metacognitive awareness, the ability to think about thinking itself, which is one of our competencies. We want our students to do this. This is where feedback transcends information transfer and becomes genuine learning partnership. So why peer feedback builds agency? Continuing with our concept from reflection to ownership. The OECD Learning Compass 2030 identifies student agency as essential for navigating an uncertain future. We no longer can predict what the world is going to be facing in even 5 or 10 years. So instead of helping students to understand how to solve problems that we already know about, we are wanting the students to prepare to solve problems that they haven't even seen yet. But what does student agency really mean in practice, right? It manifests through 3 interconnected dimensions that peer feedback naturally cultivates. So voice, expressing what quality looks like. Through peer feedback, students articulate their understanding of the goals and the success criteria, developing the language to describe good work and thoughtful practice. And this is something that comes over time. And we will address in a few slides, we will address the concerns that many teachers have about this feedback or peer feedback. Choice, deciding what feedback to apply. So learners can evaluate multiple perspectives and determine, yes, I want to follow this idea. No, I don't agree with that. I'm not going to do that. Again, it's critical thinking. It's evaluating these thoughts and ideas, which in a practical setting, students are learning how to evaluate information. So when they look at news, or when they look at TikTok, or they look at one of the other social media platforms that shares information with them, they can determine, oh, is this a good piece of information that I should follow, or should I disregard it? And then the last one is ownership, shaping your learning path. When students actively participate in assessment, they take responsibility for their growth trajectory, seeing themselves as architects of their own learning journey rather than passive recipients, which again, sidebar, helps with behavior control. All right, so a little bit more about research. Research shows that there is evidence-based practice, not just a momentary trend here. The power of collaborative reflection and peer feedback isn't based on educational trends or wishful thinking. It's grounded in robust research from multiple contexts and cultures. This evidence should give us confidence as teachers that what we are implementing is actually true, verified research that will work. It builds social confidence through collaborative reflection. It provides trust and motivation, back to that behavior issue, providing a deeper understanding and motivation intrinsically for the students. And it creates deeper understanding with peer dialogue, asking questions, giving opportunities to reflect on their thoughts and share what they're thinking. So, what are some practical classroom strategies or approaches that we could try tomorrow? Theory becomes meaningful only when we can translate it into something concrete in our classroom. And at Rekla, this is what I want to be the bridge for, taking theory and making it practical. So here are 4 proven strategies that bring peer assessment and reflective leadership to life in your classroom. And it is adaptable, pretty much to any grade. So if you're in kindergarten, you can still use these concepts. If you're in grade 12, you can still use them. Peer reflection circles. We've talked a lot about this. I'm sure you're familiar with this concept already. But it's where small groups are working on projects, 3 to 4 students. They share their learning process together, challenges that they face along the way, and each student speaks while the other practices active listening. Then offer observations and encouraging feedback. This builds speaking confidence and empathetic listening. 2 stars and a wish is a great one for the younger group, but you can also use it for the older group. Students are identifying 2 specific strengths in their peers' work. Those are the stars, and 1 area for growth. That's the wish. We have reflection journals with peer highlights. So students maintain personal reflection journals and then periodically exchange them with peers who add affirming comments and questions. This creates a written record of growth and peer support over time. And then, of course, we have student-led rubric check-ins. So here, learners use rubrics to assess their own work as well as their peers' work. And these rubrics are often created by the teacher, but they can also be created by the students in the classroom as a pre-activity to a project or learning concept. This develops assessment literacy, so it helps them understand the concepts of assessment, which might be hard when they initially start these kinds of activities. Understanding what quality looks like, right? So in a rubric, you have your mastery, and then you have 2 or 3 sections that are below that. And so students can begin to understand, oh, I'm working towards this mastery level. Right now, I'm only, at level 2, but I need to get to level 4. And these are the things that I can add or change or do. And this is how I can support my peers as well. So let's take a moment to pause and have a bit of a discussion. Which of these strategies could you try this week? Or perhaps you're already using some of these strategies and you just want to deepen or refine your practice. Take a moment to consider what feels most feasible and meaningful in your current context. Sometimes the smallest shifts create the most significant impact on student learning and confidence. I do agree, even just a small shift will make a tremendous difference in your classroom. You will see it. So here is what I was referring to earlier about what about accuracy, right? How do I trust that my youngsters, grade 1, grade 2, are going to give effective feedback? So Pasi Sahlberg in 2021 wrote, "Trust is the glue of the Finnish education system." So we are wanting to build trust from day one. Most educators worry, will my students give accurate feedback? Won't they be too kind or too mean, right? We don't want them to be mean. It'll hurt their peers' feelings. And these are valid concerns that deserve honest answers. So in the Finnish experience, it teaches us that accuracy improves with practice and guidance. But we need to be providing, as a teacher, as a facilitator, we need to be providing clear criteria, modeling through feedback. So not only is there peer feedback, there's self-assessment, there's also teacher feedback, right? And in that moment, when you're giving the feedback, that's your opportunity to model effective feedback and create safe spaces for learning. Students become remarkably insightful when they become assessors. They often notice things teachers miss because they understand the learning journey from a peer's perspective. More importantly, the goal isn't perfect assessment, right? It's the learning how to learn concept that we are focusing on here. It's developing the capacity to think critically about quality, going to articles that they see on social media or on TV, and being able to look at that information and say, I don't agree with this, and why, right? This is what we're helping them to prepare for, is the future 21st century skills. To articulate observation constructively and to care about each other's learning. So social emotional learning is built into this. These skills matter far more than flawless rubric scoring. So equity in action. In large CBC classrooms, peer feedback equals equity. In Kenya's CBC classrooms, teachers often face the beautiful challenge of working with 60, 70, or even more students at once. How can one teacher provide meaningful, individualized feedback to every child? The answer lies in leveraging the power of peers. So in my discussions with many of the Kenyan teachers, they share, there are so many students. How can this just feels like more work, CBC, right? So this is one of the ways that you can reduce that work and still meet the competency requirements. When students learn to offer each other constructive feedback, every child received personalized attention multiple times throughout a lesson, right? Create different groups, mix them up as you go through each day so that different peers are giving feedback to others. So it's not always the same person, so it's a different perspective. The quiet student in the back row gets noticed. The struggling student receives support from someone who recently mastered the same concept. And that student who has mastered the concept becomes confident in their learning, in themselves, right? The advanced student develops leadership by helping others grow. Peer assessment isn't just a time-saving strategy, it's an equity imperative. It ensures that in even the most crowded classrooms, no child becomes invisible. Every learner matters, every voice counts, and every student develops the capacity to see and support their peers' growth. When we create classroom cultures built in reflection and peer feedback, we set in motion a powerful cycle of growth that reinforces itself over time. Understanding this cycle helps us recognize how each element strengthens the other. So trust is in the very center of this pinwheel. And as that trust grows and develops, you can add the different wings. So you have the feedback, the student agency that grows from that feedback, the confidence that grows from understanding fully, wow, I know this so well, I can help my friends, to reflection. How can I do more? What are the next steps? So when feedback becomes a conversation, leadership becomes visible. Let's do one more reflection today before we go. If you could describe your ideal learning culture in one word, what would it be? Think about the classroom environment you're working to create, not the one you necessarily have right now, although that's a good exercise in reflection as well. But think about the one that you want to create, the feeling that you want students to experience when they walk through the door each day. What single word captures that vision? Perhaps it's trust, or curiosity, or belonging, growth, joy, creativity, engagement, excitement, right? Whatever the word is that resonates with you, hold it close as you implement these practices. And I would encourage you, put it on the chalkboard or the smartboard or the whiteboard, and have a circle integration discussion with your students. This is the ultimate goal for our whole class. Everyone in the class, we want you to reach this goal, right? This word. We want everybody to have joy in learning. We want everybody to be curious about what's happening. Whatever that word is for you, share it with your students. Don't keep it invisible. Don't keep it hidden. Make sure they understand the goal that the whole class is working towards, and let it guide your discussions, your decisions, and remind you of your deeper purpose. And also remind the students of the direction they're going. I invite you to share your word in the comments below. I would love to hear what those words are. Together, we'll create a collective vision of what student-centered learning can become. So next week, we will be working on creativity in every subject, from curiosity to confidence. Next week, we'll explore how curiosity and creativity continue the same cycle of growth and leadership. We'll discover how artistic thinking isn't confined to art class. It's a way of approaching every subject with wonder, imagination, and the courage to see possibilities others might miss. If reflection builds the foundation for student agency, creativity builds the walls and the roof, the full structure of confident, capable learners who can navigate uncertainty with grace and innovation. Join us as we connect leadership to the creativity capacities every child possesses. Here are your 5 takeaways today to help you reflect carrying forward. 1, reflection becomes leadership. 2, trust enables learning. 3, there's agency through voice, choice, and ownership. 4, evidence supports this practice, so you can be confident that what you are about to implement in your classroom, it has been tried and does work. And 5, there is equity in every classroom. Thank you for attending today. I am glad you are here. Let's continue building reflective learning leadership together. Thank you for joining the conversation about reflection, feedback, and student agency. The work you do every day, creating spaces where students can think, share, and grow together, shapes not just individual lives, but entire communities. As you return to your classroom, remember that small moments of peer feedback can spark profound transformations. That quiet student who finally finds their voice, that struggling learner who realizes their peers believe in them, and that confident student who discovers the joy of lifting others up. These moments are the building blocks of reflective leadership, and you are the architect. Thank you so much for attending. See you next time.